Now, she ends the article. Thompson wants to accomplish two things. She wants to consider one last possible response to her position, and then she wants to sort of summarize and articulate what she thinks she's established. So, in the last case, she considers an argument that one might forward saying that, look, there's a difference between requiring Bill Gates to act in a superlative fashion towards me and requiring a mother to act that way towards a child. And they might bolster that kind of case by pointing to the fact that we do require parents to take care of their children, that negligence and abuse are unacceptable, both ethically and legally. And so she says, it may be said that what's important is not merely the fact that the fetus is a person and hence has a right to life, but it's a person for whom the woman has a special kind of responsibility issuing from the fact that she's its mother. And Thompson says, look, here's where I think the disanalogy is. It's not a disanalogy between the relationship that I had to the hypothetical violinist or that Henry Ford had to me. Right? That somehow that relationship was what allowed for a lack of rights and responsibilities. So when we think about parents and how they get to be held responsible for the welfare of their children, they get to be held responsible for the welfare of their children by consistently acting in a way that takes on obligations and responsibilities towards them. So they act in ways that don't prevent pregnancy. They allow pregnancies to go to term. They take the children home, and so on and so on. And in doing this, they obligate themselves to these children. And they grant the children certain rights. And she says, that is a perfectly legitimate explanation for those perfectly legitimate obligations that parents have towards children. But those are disanalogous from the case here. The case here, she thinks, is really like the case of the pianist and herself, or Henry Fonda and herself. She thinks that this is a case where we have two individuals, and one individual is dependent upon the other, right? But there's nothing else that has established any kind of claim or right that the dependent individual might assert against the other in terms of the use of their body. And so she thinks that we don't find either in nature or in law just the mere fact that the child is inside the mother as a means or a basis on which to assert rights. And we've looked at other examples that might give rise to these kind of claims that a fetus might have or a child might have towards a parent, like their voluntary choices and things of this nature. But just in and of itself, just this biological fact that the woman was an egg donor, that she thinks doesn't provide us with any means of reasonably and justifiably asserting a right that a child has to the mother's body. And so she rejects these kinds of cases as being unsubstantiated for reasons that she's discussed earlier. And ending the paper, she kind of summarizes what she thinks she's accomplished. And her main goal, she says, isn't to establish a universal and exceptionless right to abortion. Rather, her goal is to show that even if you think that a fetus is a person, and even if you think that as a person it has a right to life, that in and of itself is insufficient and doesn't establish that it's morally impermissible in all cases to have abortions. And so she tells us that what she thinks she's established is as follows. She says, my argument will be found unsatisfactory on two counts by many of those who want to regard abortion as morally permissible. First, while I do argue that abortion is not impermissible, I do not argue that it is always permissible. There may well be cases in which carrying the child to term requires only minimally decent Samaritanism of the mother. Remember, this is the sort of Samaritanism that we require as a general principle, obliging all people across a wide range of circumstances. And this is a standard we must not fall below. I am inclined to think it a merit of my account precisely that it does not give a general yes or a general no. And in this way, she's really adhering to the contours of the Roe versus Wade decision. Right? Here's a sort of conflict of duties in Kantian terms. It's a clash of rights. And the cases are complex, and there are subtleties and nuances. There are things that might influence a judgment one way or another. And so she thinks that any sort of absolute and unconditional answer to this question is probably driven by blinding ideology as opposed to careful consideration of principles. And it seems that in her argument, she's really trying to do what the court tried to do in Roe versus Wade, that is, balance the rights of the fetus, the potential human being, against the rights of the mother. And so, right to privacy versus a right to life, and the right of the state to regulate procedures for the protection of potential life and for the health of the mother. So in this way, I think she does cleave to and provide a philosophical justification for the underlying principles of Roe versus Wade. And in this way, she comes out a lot like Roe versus Wade, saying that it's at least possible that there are some cases. She doesn't argue that there have been a demonstration of any cases where abortion is morally impermissible, but she does argue that it's not inconceivable that it is in some cases. And so, in this way, her position reflects nicely the sort of structure that you saw emerge in Roe versus Wade as a court decision.